Welcome everyone. My name is Dr Petra Kuhnert. I'm an Associate Science Director for University Engagement in CSIRO's Data 61, and I'm also a Senior Research Scientist working on developing fit-for-purpose data-driven AI solutions to some of Australia's pressing problems in agriculture and environment. It's a pleasure to be your host for today's CSIRO Conversations, AI with ROI, a guide to smarter AI investment. Now, we've had a couple of thousand people register for this event today, which is awesome. It indicates the immense interest in this topic and the need to have some accessible guidance in this rapidly evolving area that holds immense potential, but also some significant challenges. Now, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people as the traditional owners of the land on which I'm joining you today, which is Brisbane. I recognise the continuing connection to land, sea and community of Australia's Indigenous people and honour their enduring cultural heritage and responsibilities as the first custodians of this land and as the nation's first scientists and engineers. Now, in the context of today's conversation, we're committed to learning from their knowledge and working together intentionally to care for this country now and for future generations. Now, before we dive into this session, a bit of housekeeping. So you can control the volume and add closed captions at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If you'd like to submit a question to our panelists while we're online, please use the Q&A function on the right-hand side of the screen. We'll obviously aim to cover as many questions as we can through this discussion today, so please pop your questions in the Q&A tab so the team can push them through to me as we go on. Thank you also to those people who have already pre-submitted questions via our form already. Now, in today's webinar, there is also a chat function where you can connect with the many people joining us from all over Australia today. So please make sure your questions for the panel go into the Q&A tab, otherwise they might get lost in the chat. Now, we're also posting a quick poll in the chat now for you to give us a bit of a steer on how you feel about today's topic. So you may be able to, you might be about to embark on an AI journey and wanting to invest in a range of AI projects, but not sure how. There might be some of you online who own a small business and just wanting to see what all the AI hype is about and whether to invest. You might be one of the many in a productivity discussion or part of an organisation wanting to engage with AI. Irrespective of your motivation for joining today, we hope this conversation will help you on this AI investment journey. So this poll will reappear at the end of the call too, so we can also gauge how today's session went. So with the housekeeping out of the way, let's begin. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panel for today, and I thank each of them for making the time to share their perspectives on this topic of growing national and international interest. So our first panelist is Professor Elanor Huntington. She is the Deputy Chief Executive of CSIRO and a researcher of international stature in quantum technologies. As a member of the CSIRO executive team, Elanor leads the enterprise-wide strategy and engagement portfolio of Australia's National Science Agency. Elanor is here to provide high-level strategic oversight on how AI investment fits into broader organisational and national capability strategies. Welcome, Elanor. Our next panellist is Dr Stefan Hajkowicz. He is a Chief Research Consultant at CSIRO's Data 61 and the lead author of the AI Investment Guide, and we'll get to that guide a bit later. His expertise is in the fields of AI management science and economic geography and conducts original research and provides policy strategy advice to government and industry. He is here today to help organisations navigate the challenge that up to 80% of AI projects fail. Welcome, Stefan. And finally, our third panellist is Dr. Kendra Vant. Kendra has spent her career creating and leading product and engineering teams across numerous industries. Kendra has deep expertise in threading data and AI through new projects and companies in a way that opens up new markets. She guides boards and C-suites to success with AI solutions to real business problems and helps to sort the real from the wishful thinking in AI hype. Welcome, Kendra. So I'd like to start by setting the scene a little before we move into the discussion today. I'd like to propose that there is an elephant in every boardroom, the urgent pressure to do something with AI while navigating the unprecedented uncertainty about how to do it right. With global AI investment projected to reach $980 billion by 2028, yes, you heard correctly, leaders across industries are feeling the pressure to act, often without a clear strategy or direction. AI has definitively passed the test of business application. There have been pilot studies showing success, and now we're entering into the next critical phase, which is substantial strategic investments across all industries. But here's the problem. Up to 80% of AI projects fail, representing billions in wasted resources and missed opportunities. Navigating the AI landscape is tricky. AI is touted to accelerate processes and boost productivity, but its success really depends on how it's applied within each organisation's unique context. Many are grappling with how to do this in a cost-effective way while navigating competing constraints such as privacy and data security, ensuring equitable and inclusive outcomes, robustness, and the ethical considerations of what AI produces, not to mention how to bring its people along on this journey. So to navigate this uncertainty, CSIRO has released a new guide to help organisations make smarter AI investment decisions. Evaluating and prioritising artificial intelligence projects offers a practical systems-based approach to identifying AI initiatives that are more likely to succeed and deliver real value. Now you can see the details and download the PDF from the CSIRO website. You may have already downloaded it yourself, perhaps. It should be easy enough to find with a bit of Googling, but the links are provided in the chat as well. So this kind of structured thinking is exactly what we'll be exploring today. And our expert panel, are here today to help you move from the AI hype to the high impact AI implementation as we consider all of these complexities on this AI journey. So let's kick this conversation off and ask, why do we need a guide? So Elanor, as Deputy CEO of CSIRO, you've seen firsthand how organisations are grappling with AI adoption. What prompted CSIRO to create this investment guide in the first place? Was there a particular light bulb moment or mounting evidence that made you think we really need to help organisations get this right?
It's a good question, Petra. And if I go back in time a little bit, the purpose of CSIRO as Australia's national science agency is to do the research that has a positive impact on Australia's community and our economy, and to see that research through to impact. And so one of the things we do as part of that is to do some foresighting and to look into the technological future and try to backcast into the present to help our community and our economy shape that and gain some agency over it. So a couple of years ago, Stefan and I got together because I could see that the advent of foundation models at commercial scale were going to fundamentally restructure the way that people accessed artificial intelligence. It was going to make it a whole lot more accessible to a whole lot more individuals, firms, and in fact, nation states. Part of what we were trying to do there was to open the conversation about how you gain agency over that and how you understand what that might mean. Fast forward a couple of years, and that has absolutely proven to be true. Artificial intelligence is now enterprise grade. People are using it, as you have said. And the next step in acquiring agency is that we've got a whole lot of, if you will forgive the expression, hot takes about a techno-utopia, a techno-dystopia, and everything in between. And so it seemed like the next step in the agency journey was to start to think about how we give people the tools to navigate this decision-making themselves. And so I contacted Stefan and said, let's get the band back together. And this report is the consequence of doing that. And certainly our objective with this is to help as many people at community, organisation and nation scale work their way through that and make the decisions themselves.
That's fantastic. So before we get to the details of the guide itself, let's talk about some fundamentals. Obviously, this prioritisation is about AI projects. So I'll move to you, Kendra. When we talk about AI projects, what exactly are companies investing in? Are we talking about the generative AI models like ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, or are we thinking much broader here?
It's a great question, Petra, and one that I could go on for a very long time. I will attempt not to. So I think when I'm working with companies, I see two general buckets of people, where people are looking to invest their money at the moment. And I think you're right that although AI is a very broad umbrella term, 95% of the time when people are using it today, they're actually talking about generative AI, and almost entirely they're talking about using large language models. So if we look at that, where I see Australian companies and organisations using large language models today, it tends to be in one of two buckets. It's either companies who are bringing in the consumer grade tools, so Copilot, ChatGPT, Claude, the sort of the consumer facing version of each company's model, and they're using them in the way that I call individual productivity tools. So they're hoping that by releasing ChatGPT Teams or Microsoft Copilot to the rest of their organization, they'll get a lot of people who can make a lot of small gains in processes, and they'll sort of lift their ability to move fast in that way. So that's one, sort of individual productivity at scale across your company. The other one I see, and this tends to be more reserved for companies that either have software engineering capability themselves, or for whom it's worth bringing in external software engineering capability, is when they're taking the large language models from the providers, so from Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and they're actually building those large language models into either their own workflows, if they're a really large enterprise, or if they happen to be a SaaS company, of which Australia has some wonderful examples, building it into their customer-facing products. So they're taking the large language models and they're actually integrating them so that you don't feel that you're interacting with a standalone tool, but instead you're benefiting from the large language model integration as you use the company's either internal or customer-facing products. So those to be the two big buckets that I see today. Obviously, there's far more people picking up the tools and using them in individual productivity ways. The ones that really interest and excite me are where we are actually integrating into the workflows, because I think that's where Australia can build on what we've done, and sort of it can get better and better and more exciting.
Yeah, right. So what do you think are the common misconceptions around the term AI when you're interacting with CEOs and board members from major companies?
That's a great question. I wouldn't quite so much say misconceptions, but I think some of the things that you have to think about slightly differently when you use large language models. It's really common for senior executives in Australia to be used to dealing with what we call deterministic systems. So if you ask it to do something, it will do exactly that thing every time. Large language models by design don't do that. They are non-deterministic. They, with some probability, will give you some answer. That's what makes them feel so much more like interacting with a human. That's what makes them, in many cases, so much more versatile. But it is a bit of a paradigm shift. So that's probably where I see some folk trip up, is where they say, well, can't I do that with AI now? And as I'm sure we're going to get into with talking about the guide, the answer is no, not always. So the best advice you can give people is say, concentrate really hard on your business problem, and let's see where we can apply the new technologies around generative AI to that business problem.
Oh, that's really good advice. Now, before I move to my next question, which will be directed at Stefan, how's everyone going online? What do you consider as an AI project? Are your thoughts in line with what Kendra's been talking about? I believe a poll might be posted in the chat somewhere for you to give us your thoughts. So, Stefan, what do you think should be the must-dos before investing in AI? So what things should be completed in an industry case before considering AI implementation? And this question was a question sent to us before we started the conversation today.
Right. I mean, the first thing to do is not even think about AI, is to think about business problems. But I think, you know, echoing what Elanor was saying, is that we have reached this point in the journey, and I think this is why Elanor reached out to me, was to have a look at the question of how you get return on investment in AI, because I'm sitting in front of boards like Kendra is, and actually, Kendra, what you've just said is so close to my framing. I use slightly different language of centralized versus democratized approaches. Where democratized, where all staff are given access to these tools, and one large ASX company I'm working with, they've just done this en masse to thousands of staff. And then centralized is where you're starting to choose AI projects, and for me, they are they are, investments in AI are buying access to these proprietary tools, building agentic layers. We're seeing a lot of that happen as well, where we're, developing software that effectively, if you think of these foundation models like brains, there's all these brains floating around out there in the world, and companies are building agentic interfaces to these brains to allow them to work and behave in certain sorts of ways. Then there's fine tuning of existing models. There's supervised learning of data that the company has, and then some really heavy lifting at the foundation model end, which is also happening in Australia. There are some efforts to create Australian large language models underway, and it's really quite exciting. So the guide is responding to this. And then where do you start, and what does the guide take you through? Well, I think start with the problem, not the tech, is usually the first thing. And that's key, because I think you can get wrapped up with a vendor or a tech solution that at the end of the day, a lot of where it goes wrong, that 80% failure rate in the studies, and there's two reports out there that point to that. There's one by the Queensland University of Technology by David Shellshire, Professor David Shellshire, that's a book he wrote called Why Data Science Projects Fail, which came to that number. But then there's another one by a consulting firm in America called Rand Corporation, which does a lot of work primarily in the defense sector, but more broadly on tech strategy issues, and they found exactly the same number. And a big reason is the teams will get well into what they're doing and then wonder why they're doing it 6 months into the process, and that's okay. But I think we want to front load the thinking as much as we can and focus on the business problems we're really trying to solve, and then start to work with what I call the low-hanging fruit. And I know there's different views on this, but I do tend to suggest start with the low-hanging fruit where your company can learn what's going on and then get those benefits. Then you're budgeting for people, data, and change, not just software, as you go through these things, and that's critical. Often those are the complex bits. Lack of data. Other companies I work with, I can see the really big obstacle they've got to clear before they get any value out of AI is a lot of boring work with data. Costly but tedious, but essential. AI needs your data more than your data needs AI, and that's something that a lot of companies do need to look at. And then it's, I think, starting to another key thing for the guide to me is about using the right level of effort and approach to doing this. Now, we in the guide talk about return on investment calculations, benefit cost analysis, multi-criteria decision analysis, and cost effectiveness analysis, portfolio. We bring all that into it. My background's in decision theory, and I actually did my economics degree with CSIRO, mostly in natural resource and environment, where we were developing these sorts of economic frameworks for investment appraisal to get best bang for the buck on environment problems. And it struck me as I came into the space of digital technology and AI, ICT projects have 30% failure rates out there in industry as well. They're very high failure rates. And then you get to AI, and I think it's almost like R&D investment. It's high risk, but huge payoff as well. What struck me, though, as I look at all of this, is why we haven't thought more about this, why we haven't thought more about how to leverage decision theory and economic evaluation methodology to get better return on investment in technology. And I think there is scope to do that, but it doesn't always have to be onerous. It can be a checklist approach that is structured. But if you are spending hundreds of millions of dollars, that's where you want to be using a more detailed analysis.
Okay, well, we're just starting to touch on the guide. I'm just going to pause for a moment because I've received the results from the first poll, and it seems that about 50% of the people online who responded have a basic understanding of the topic today, but a lot don't. So now that we have a better sense of what an AI project is and what companies are keen to invest in, let's dive into the guide in a bit more detail. So Stefan, you've obviously written the AI investment guide to help people navigate the complexity of making AI investments. Can you give us a bit of a brief summary of what is in the guide and what should leaders really need to know?
Look, I think I covered some of that just then in terms of the checklist at the front, which really takes you through the process of thinking about the problem you're trying to solve, of identifying use cases, prioritizing use cases, but also I think as Kendra sort of pointed out, those different sort of philosophies, which I've called democratized and centralized. Kendra, what language you use? Different way of describing the sort of the ways into making AI investment decisions, but that's part of what's in there as well. Handling risk and uncertainty and seeing things in a systems perspective is another big part of the guide. It really is a short document, but for a much larger and more complex problem that we're trying to unpack. And the overall purpose here is how you get return on investment. So I think, you know, there's two waves of opportunity with AI investment. If you're looking at investing in the stock market, I think the first one was the AI companies themselves. The next wave of opportunity in AI will be companies that do figure out how to get ROI from AI. And some companies are figuring that out in all different, you know, in mining, in manufacturing, in retail. There are companies that are starting to figure it out. What does it look like when done well? I would point to companies like Coles and the Commonwealth Bank of Australia as fairly early movers who invested in their AI use cases quite some time ago. And, you know, when you check out at Coles, the camera is accurately working out whether what you're moving across and scan. That was due to investments and use cases in computer vision, which perfectly lined up to what that company needed to do. And I think that's a case of it's sort of done its first tranche of use cases, and I've no doubt more in the pipeline being planned. But that's what we're trying to get to here is starting to understand what it looks like inside your company to realize that value.
Yeah, thanks. And for those online who haven't managed to download the guide, I believe the link's been thrown into the chat. What are your initial thoughts and reactions? Feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A portal and any reactions you have in the chat. It's interesting that you bring up Coles, because I was only at Woolies the other day where I was buying some zucchinis, and the AI tool picked up that it was cucumbers. So I could have got zucchinis at the price of cucumbers. I'm not sure if that would have been a good thing for me or not. Now, Kendra, Stefan's guide mentions that organisations are under pressure to do something with AI, which sounds like a recipe for disaster and expensive mistakes. So the guide also highlights that 80% of AI projects fail, which is a huge percentage. So in your opinion, what do organisations need to watch out for? What are some of the characteristics of a well-executed AI investment portfolio?
I think Stefan's already touched on the one that I think is really important and you can make a lot of difference with, and it's understanding that successfully bringing complicated technology of any kind, but particularly large language models into your company is going to be some part technical change and an enormous part process change. So that's probably the biggest mistake that I see companies make, is that they see this as a technology project, which it absolutely is. This is complex technology, and having someone who has expertise in the space is really helpful. It's not sufficient. You also need to understand, how is it going to change the way information flows around my company? How is it going to impact the people I'm asking to pick it up and use it? Australia is actually among the more cautious countries around our comfort levels with taking AI into our organisations. We shouldn't be concerned about that. We should say, well, that's really interesting. If there are Australians who are uncomfortable about using this technology in their workplace, what do we need to do to make them feel more comfortable? So that is one thing that I think companies could really benefit from putting more effort into upfront, is what process change will I need? What technology change will I need, and what cultural change will I need to successfully adopt these technologies? Because there's ways and ways of bringing generative AI into your space. Probably the other one that I really see people just not at the beginning understanding, and therefore really under-investing in, is testing the tools. It's been the truism for a long time that it's easy in software engineering and in sort of the more traditional forms of machine learning to get to 80% working, and then the next 20% is really hard. What's happened with large language models is it's become even easier to get something that looks as though it works, and significantly harder to take that, hey, it works, pilot, into something that is really reliable and robust inside your organization. So when I talk to teams who are taking large language models and actually integrating them into their workflows, I'm suggesting to them that if they're not spending about 80% of their time on testing, they haven't yet understood how complicated and in how many ways the stuff they're working with might actually fail. So those will be the two big ones for me. Think about all the change that wraps around the technology change that you're making, and from the very beginning, understand how much time you'll need to invest in testing that what you built is doing what you want it to do in a reliable and robust way.
That's really good advice. Now, this next question has come from an audience member. Are you aware of any novel business models that are emerging that place AI first?
So I certainly hear people discussing the idea of the first $1 billion one-person startup. So people are certainly really excited about using the technology and the tools to bootstrap their way to larger companies with smaller numbers of people. So most of the emerging ones that I've seen already happen are around people using large language models in the marketing and communication side of their business. I think it depends where you want to apply the technologies to based on what kind of business you are. So there will be as many answers to this question as there are types of business. I also think that some of the conversations around emerging new business models are just that. They are emerging, and it is so wonderful that we have people who have the entrepreneurial spirit to say, I'm going to give it a go. Realistically, I don't think we know yet which ones of those are going to work and which ones of those are going to fail. We are in that very exciting time where we need to throw a lot of things at the wall and see what sticks. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I wouldn't point to places where I really think we have AI first sections of our economy substantially emerging.
Okay, thank you.
Kendra, can I have a follow-up? Because I'm in working with some large organisations which are not AI first, and they're in the journey of working out how to use AI to transform. I wonder at some point whether the strategy is actually creating a sandpit team that gets to completely reconceptualize the organisation, given AI and all of the advanced technology that we have today, and you effectively ask them to rebuild the organisation to see what they come up with, and could it look a lot different? And I haven't actually tried this yet, but would that be a good idea?
It's a really interesting question. I think it's harder to do the larger you are, right? Because as much as we believe that many of our large organizations are tech heavy, they're really process heavy. They really have an enormous number of people gluing together an enormous amount of technology. Where I do think AI is going to potentially make a big change is sort of more of the space that I've played in a lot of my professional life, which is tech first firms. So it's long been true that although it often seems like a good idea to simply entirely rebuild your product in a new technical stack, thus leaving all your technical legacy debt behind you, it's really uncommon for that to be done successfully. It shouldn't be, because it should be you have enormous amounts of business knowledge and you have a customer base, you know how to build it, just put down the tech you have today and build it right next to it. It's been attempted, it usually fails. That is one place that I do believe that we might start to see far more success in people who understand the area in which they work. They have legacy technology, which is now starting to become a little long in the tooth and hard to maintain. It's slowing them down. This is usually where an entrepreneurial startup will come in and pick off their customers as they sort of slow down and become more difficult to be nimble. I do think that the coding tools that are emerging, which in the hands of really experienced software engineers can make software development remarkably more productive, I do think the rebuild next to tech stack model is one that we will see far more of. So that will be absolutely fascinating in the coming years.
Yeah, my CSIRO colleague John Whittle is who's soon going to be publishing a book, and this calls it Band-Aid solutions, where we get AI and we put it on top of existing business process. But the problem is actually the business process, not the AI. So we make the business process way more efficient, but it's not necessarily what we would want to be doing, which causes me to think, is there a way we can rethink it? Yeah.
Stefan, based on your research, and I'm not sure how much you can divulge, but what are your insights on the patterns of success and failure of implementing AI projects? Have you seen specific examples that you can talk to? I can appreciate that maybe you can't.
Yeah, look, I can talk to them at a high level, certainly. And I think there's some amazingly simple things that I've seen done with AI that are incredibly effective. One was sort of an AI team was formed inside a company, and one of the people on the team wanted to take some recreation leave, but didn't know what category of leave to call it. There were different categories, and found the HR manual hard to use. It's probably a familiar story for a lot of people, because I certainly struggle with some of those things. Anyway, so he turned it in all of the HR information. He ingested it into a Microsoft Copilot application, which was then made available to all staff to be able to query any thing about the organisation's rules and requirements on leave. A simple thing that only took a very short period of time for them to learn. They still had, it was an investment choice. He had to give up some of his limited time to build this capability, but it worked. And I think that sort of simple thing is often a great entree into starting to understand what you can do with it. But then certainly we've seen some Australian companies pick more seriously for larger projects. I think they've been willing, the ones that have worked, they've been willing to fail a lot first until they finally get the system working. They've invested in data. And then I think we gave case. I think a lot of what's going on in the finance sector with loan approvals, for example, and in insurance, I think we'll start to see soon around speeding up claims approvals processes. I think we are starting to see some really significant successful cases there that are probably what I'd call heavier lifting, and they're where AI models have been trained up and developed for specific tasks within the business. But that's sort of what I'm seeing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I heard a lot from the conversation before between yourself, Kendra, and Stefan. You know, there's value in context or in understanding the context for an organisation. So this next question from the audience leans into that a little. And the question is, how can organisations determine whether implementing AI is genuinely necessary for their context rather than simply adopting it because everyone else is doing it? So how does an organisation know if AI implementation is truly needed beyond just following the trend? So I'm not sure who might like to start off with that, maybe Kendra?
It's a really hard question and a good one to be struggling with, because I think that you don't want to spend simply because other people are. A different way, though, that I would look at it, and one that I often do sit and discuss with chief executives and with boards, is the one thing you don't want to do is do nothing. So you want to be, at this point in time, a learning organisation. Let's be honest, we don't know where this technology is going to go. There has been billions and billions of dollars poured into it, and it's an area in which there's an enormous amount of speculation and hype. But it's really unlikely that it's just going to vanish. It's going to be hardened, it's going to evolve, it's going to become cheaper, it's going to become more ubiquitous and easier to use. The one thing I wouldn't do is ignore it and do nothing. My advice to CEOs is usually to say, where you want to be in 2 years is having a lot more internal understanding about how this technology can be applied to your industry than you do today. So find a piece of your business where you believe you can invest a reasonable amount of money and get a reasonable outcome. Make it not trivial, because if it's trivial, your executive will stop paying attention to it and you won't actually learn anything. But don't make it business ending, because this is quite new technology and it is quite likely to not work out quite the way you expect. But don't call that a failure. And that's what I'm really careful about, because as long as you go into it believing that one of the most important things you can do is learn, even if the project fails to deliver on the ROI, if you have gone into it with the belief that what you need to do is figure out how to apply this technology to your industry, you will come out the other end having learned a lot more about how to apply this. It's a really unusual situation that we're in, a new technology that we're all fiddling with, that we can't quite pin down where it will be helpful. And in that situation, the people and the companies and the organizations that will ultimately be successful are the ones who go through a structured learning process and believe that failing to do what they intended is actually a really, really good learning outcome. So perhaps that's how I'd reframe the question, is nobody can tell you exactly where for your industry or your space it's going to be cost effective to apply this. But if you go into it with the belief that what you definitely will walk away with is much more understanding of how to apply it cost effectively, it's pretty much a win-win situation.
That's great advice.
Sorry, was there a bit of a freeze?
There was a great
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
There was
Oh, sorry about
me.
that. No, sorry about that. do you have any further insights in relation to that question about, you know, how does an organisation know where AI is truly needed instead of just following the trend?
I think it's a good question, because I think with some organisations don't do AI sometimes. You know, it's not a given that you actually need to do this. I actually think there is this anti-AI backlash forming in a lot of customer service environments. I think look at the human delivering the service instead of an AI system. Now, it's in all likelihood, AI will play a significant role and there is value in it. So it's not, you know, it's a bit sort of tongue in cheek to say that comment. But I think it is totally valid to be looking at things and actually asking, well, do we really need AI here? Is AI going to help? Is it more human? Should we be investing in our frontline human staff as opposed to an AI solution? And I think that is valid alongside the actual AI investment.
Mm-hmm. And Elanor, I mean, CSIRO is navigating this space as well. Do you have any views in relation to this?
Yes, we are navigating it at the moment, and it's worth remembering that CSIRO is a 100-year-old organisation, so we were definitely imagined and created in the days well before AI came along. So we, like every other large organisation, are working our way through how we would reimagine the way we do our business, and that's not just focused on the enterprise side around processes and reading the HR manual and that sort of stuff. It's also around how we would actually go about doing our science and our research as well. And so like almost every other large organisation out there, we are working our way through that at the moment. And to Kendra's point, the approach that we are taking at the moment is very much around aspiring to, like, running some experiments that are big enough to allow us to learn something, to allow us to pay attention, but not to the point of betting the farm on the organisation, on that particular experiment. And our aspiration is, as Kendra said, to understand, to be in a position in a couple of years to understand much more how AI will actually have a positive impact on our business. And I think so to some extent we're struggling with the same questions as everyone else. And we are doing some experiments. We've got some internal experiments where we are, Stefan mentioned John Whittle, the head of our Data 61 research area. We've got some experiments where Data 61 are building some AI platforms to help us experiment with doing our science differently. And we too have enterprise grade software inside of the organisation. And at the moment where it's to use Stefan's language, it's a democratized tool to see where that might go. We are, I think, on the cusp of starting to think our own way through how we would move beyond the initial set of early experiments to either try to find some new places to experiment or to go a little harder in a couple of places. So we're struggling with the same set of challenges as everyone else. And certainly, if you step back and say, okay, this is a problem that cuts to the core of how we deliver value, and the technology backs that in, then we are trying to live by that way of thinking about things and trying to come at it from that perspective first. And of course, we too have to make investments about the technology and the infrastructure that sits behind that and work our way into that as we go, which sounds a little odd for a science agency, but we're a century old, and we need to figure out how to move into the next century with a new set of tools and a new set of techniques.
Elanor, can I ask a follow-up question, because this is about CSIRO, but probably applies more broadly to other organisations grappling with it too. When we did that work on AI for science, there were two bodies of thought that formed around it. One was this was going to make us more efficient, faster, safer, better at our jobs as scientists, and we'd cover more ground, but it wasn't going to change the fundamentals of the business. But the other one, and it was probably from the Turing Institute that we partnered with in the UK, was no, this is absolutely going to reinvent how we do knowledge creation and scientific discovery. This is how we create a hypothesis, how we brainstorm, and somewhere around the track is a human working closely with a piece of AI. And I think as I work in the insurance sector, there are similar views. You could completely reinvent an insurance company, and potentially we could get a team of our best data scientists and AI people to build an insurance company in a new way and transform it. So my question is, do you have a view where we sit on this? Is AI something that's just efficient and useful, or is it really going to upend CSIRO in another 10 years and totally unrecognizable?
That's a really interesting and tricky question. So I would say a little irritatingly, a little of both. And the reason I say that is because, to Kendra's point, one of the features of artificial intelligence is that it is not deterministic. It can generate outcomes that are based on a probability distribution, but they are not known in advance. So that means that if you were to lean into what's going on in the research community across the world, which is that there is a exponentially growing number of researchers and scientists who are being supported by artificial intelligence and therefore generating an exponentially growing amount of data, that is now almost already beyond the ability of any individual human brain to internalize that and actually to work out what is a sensible hypothesis that you might generate. So if you were to feed that into artificial intelligence to simply cope with the large volume of data, most likely it's going to produce an average result and it's not going to be massively disruptive, but every now and then it could statistically produce something that is radically different and actually upends the way that we approach a particular research question. So that, like, there's just a sheer volume piece there. If you were to then look at some of the other uses of artificial intelligence, for example, the AlphaFold software, which is a piece of artificial intelligence software that solved a problem around an outstanding problem that nobody had solved around understanding how protein folds and what that means in a range of particular applications. Nobody solved that. Nobody knew how to do it. It was actually a significant blocker to the advancement of an entire branch of research globally by developing that AlphaFold software, which is a piece of artificial intelligence software that outperformed anything else. It's unlocked an entire domain of research. So the thing that keeps us all interested in chasing this world is that we might find another AlphaFold somewhere on a long-held, multi-decade-old problem that nobody knows how to answer. And if you can answer it, then a whole new territory of insight opens up. So little from column A, little from column B. We don't know, and that's kind of what keeps us coming back.
Great discussion, and there are lots of questions coming through in the Q&A. Now, one of the words that comes up in nearly every sentence about AI of late is productivity. And there are a couple of questions that have come into the chat around productivity and seeking productivity gains with the help of AI. But this is a really nice question that I'm going to ask the panel, and maybe, Kendra, we can start with you. The Productivity Commission is advocating for less restrictions on AI use, including during the government's productivity roundtable. How does AI improve productivity in knowledge work? What are some real examples beyond drafting meeting minutes or summarising 10 pages into one? So maybe we'll start with you, Kendra, and then move to Stefan.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and we're still figuring it out, right? So there's two really big challenges with productivity, and one of them is how on earth do you measure it? And whenever I have a conversation with someone around productivity, it's a really, really tough thing to measure. So I'm not an expert in that space, and so that's probably as far as I'll go down that route. I think one place where we are, and this is a fairly narrow use case, but one place where we are seeing gains in productivity from AI tools, which are not first draft fairy, or could you please summarize these meeting notes for me, which have become a little ubiquitous, is in software engineering. So it is making significant changes to the way a professional software engineer undertakes their job and to the way that all of the other disciplines wrap around that. So if you work in a firm that writes its own software, you've got software engineers, you've got business analysts, you've got product managers. There is already significant change in how those processes go on. Not vibe coding, Elanor, that was not actually what I was thinking of. What I'm thinking about is how you take really talented and experienced professionals, and we are now able to put in their hands tools that they can use to make themselves significantly more productive. Now, even that is not an unalloyed joy. If you're a security researcher in this space, you will be sitting there tearing your hair out as I suggest that people use software engineering augmentation tools through AI, because we have an interesting challenge around what sort of security challenges that's going to bring up, which we've seen before. We've seen that with other sort of significant changes in the way software engineering is built. So that's one actually concrete answer to the audience question, is there are actually substantial changes in productivity in how companies build software. I am not aware of another place that I can point to where I can say today, right now, with the knowledge that we have, we can substantively say that we see large productivity gains in this space, but that reflects more about the areas that I play in than what's actually happening out there in the world. So I'm going to popcorn this off to Stefan to get his insights as well.
Yeah, so we're amidst a productivity slump, and it's a national challenge. And this is why at the national level, massive investments are occurring across the OECD in artificial intelligence. This is why to spend money on artificial intelligence, because the only way you grow wealth in an advanced economy like Australia's is via productivity gains. And productivity gains come from ideation and doing things faster, smarter. And that's what AI should be all about, as a general purpose tech. So what we see at the sort of like software engineers, there's studies showing 50 to 60% faster at their job with no loss of quality. And that's huge. And that's a really significant uplift. I code in Python. I use these AI tools all the time to speed that up. I do vibe coding, Elanor, but you know, and I'd be shot by some of my purist colleagues but I do vibe coding with a lot of checking and making sure it all works properly. But absolutely, it lets me get a first draft of a Python script that cuts a couple of weeks off a problem and makes it a couple of hours instead. And it helps me pick up problems in code. And this is huge. This is a chance to do things a lot faster and better. And I think but it's not just coders. We can actually, a study done on management consultants by Boston Consulting Group and Harvard University found a 40% or 20 to 40% increase in speed and efficiency at the task they were performing. A lot of customer support staff, a study done by Stanford University was pointing to up to a 35% or so increase. And we see a lot of these studies where we have the group using AI and the group not using AI. And the group using AI are faster typically and better and cover more ground. And I think it's more than just being faster. I can, with these tools, do more different things that I couldn't previously do. But what comes into a problem is when we add it up to the organization level, it's hard to see. Like, I don't know, Elanor, can we see the productivity gains of AI for CSIRO yet? Yeah. And it's partly a measurement. How would you even measure that? But we would hope it's happening, but we don't really know. And then we add it up to the national level, and it, you know, despite the last 20 years of digital technology and AI, we don't see any productivity gains. And it's called Solov's paradox. And, you know, this disconnect between what should be happening and what actually is happening with productivity, but huge measurement challenges. And we don't know what happens if you take all this tech out of the economy. It might end up being a lot worse. So this is one of the key reasons why we're investing in AI and why, you know, we have expectations of these outcomes, and I think it's good. But here's my thing, and this is, you know, when Elanor asked me to write the guide, to me, part of the why was if Australian companies crack the question of how to invest, how to get return on investment, how to, you know, a lot of the boards I work with, Kendra, and I'm not sure about you, they're across the line and they're saying, yeah, we get it. AI really matters for our sector. We can see what's going on globally in our marketplace. We're across the line. We need to invest. And they're wanting to hit this big red AI button. So then an AI team forms and someone's given the challenge of doing it. And that gets a lot harder all of a sudden. And how you actually, regardless of how much money you've got to invest, and some of it's getting pretty big, how you actually turn this really complicated, powerful tech called AI into productivity in your organization, that's where I think things start to fall apart, and we're stumbling with that question about how to do it. And I think, you know, these tools are amazing, but there's another set of complex R&D questions and challenges about how they're turned into business value and productivity. Yeah, productivity matters. It's where we're at. Yeah.
Yeah. A couple of questions have come in around the guide itself and asking about what are some of the more unique AI items that need to be considered and may need to be highlighted. And I assume some of this might be around, I guess, ethics or considering ethics in doing some of the prioritization. so how can ethics be effectively integrated into the design and testing of AI solutions, and how can this ethical approach be demonstrated in a business case or solution feasibility assessment? Stefan, do you want to take this one as you're the author of the guide?
I wrote the ethics framework that was published in 2019 and is the principles. And I think, ethical AI is likely to be more efficient and better return on investment AI. Typically you do start to hit ethical stumbling blocks, but there's all sorts of challenges. Like, actually, Kendra, one challenge that I came across in the legal sector, working with judges, AI has been shown to be really efficient and good at what they're doing, but this thing that you raised about what I call stochastic versus deterministic, we've gone from deterministic, which is rules-based code, to stochastic, where the model can give us two different answers. Like we ask it something the first time, and then the next time it can give us, for the same question, a different answer. And that makes it almost unusable because of the ethical principles around explainability and transparency get really high in the courts. You can't just say because the AI said so. You got to have a reason. And how do we unpack that? And I'd see that as an example of why we can't see the productivity and the benefits from AI, is because if we can't clear that explainability hurdle, which is one of our ethics principles, can't use it. Do you encounter that too, Kendra?
So for sure, this is a question that comes up all the time, which is how do I make sure that I'm only applying AI in a space where I won't be creating ethical challenges that don't already exist? And I'm really careful when I say that, because ethical challenges are not unique to AI. It is really challenging to make sure that we conduct our businesses in ethical ways in general. And I've been working in this space for a long time. It's certainly not new to generative AI. For instance, I remember some time ago working with the original large language models, and I'm dating myself here a little bit, but we're talking CNNs and vector embeddings back, say, circa 2015. And one conversation I got into with my colleagues then, when they said, Kendra, you have to make sure that this model is fair. We were using it in a job search context. So yeah, it was really, really important. And one conversation we did have was, I said, well, I'll build you a fair model when you can show me a fair world. So I think we do have to lead into the challenge that things that we do today are not necessarily as completely ethical and fair as we believe they are, because it's an extremely difficult thing to shoot for. One thing I will say, though, is that I think that we need to see quite a lot of adaptation in our legal system as we bring more AI systems into the way we do business, because we have a system of law that is set up to understand how to deal with things where humans make mistakes and humans do things wrong. So one space where I certainly see some of Australia's larger companies leading into is, we know what would happen if the human-used processes we have today failed. We're not sure what would happen if we imbue those processes with generative AI and they fail. And this is certainly a conversation that's being taken up a lot in the US around where would the liability fall for different parts of failure in different parts of complex systems. So it's a really complicated question. I think it's something that is going to keep us really busy for years to come. One thing I would say, though, is that don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. Where I see organizations sometimes just really teetering on the precipice here and saying, I don't want to make a step because I am really, really concerned about this. What I've seen work well, particularly for smaller organizations, is have a principles-based AI governance framework and be very clear that we are still learning about this and we are going to change it. But I actually saw one large ASX company quite literally become immobilized by an inability to answer questions about how to apply AI ethically. And I think the way to avoid that is to be really upfront about it, have a simple set of principles-based guidance about how folks should use AI in the organization, and be really clear to the organization that you expect this to change and evolve as we take a use case, understand it, and update our guidelines to stand with it. So again, I think this has been a bit of a theme throughout the webinar. People should get in and have a go. And perhaps the really distinctive thing with AI is always be clear with people that because we're learning, things are going to change, and we're going to update our policies and guidelines a little more frequently than people might be used to and comfortable with.
Absolutely.
you mind if I
Petra,
jump in on
yeah.
that?
Yeah,
Which
go
is
for it,
just to
Ellen.
make the observation that when people talk about artificial intelligence, it's actually it's a collection of pieces of software embedded within larger compute systems, which then are embedded within software systems, which are then embedded, deterministic software systems, which are then embedded within people systems. And the transition from ethical principles to how you might actually engineer the systems that sit around the piece of machine learning or planning and optimization or whatever is the artificial intelligence, that there's actually some significant work that can and should be done to think about how you engineer the systems around that. And to give people an example, the internal combustion engine is an inherently dangerous thing. And yet we stick it inside of a car. The first versions of cars were not particularly safe. And then we started building safety systems around the car. And that then sits in a transportation system that has a set of rules and qualifications for the drivers and a bunch of stuff around that. So that has not completely eliminated the danger associated with internal combustion systems, but we have allowed ourselves to grow systems around that, so that, and they are engineering systems as well as people systems, and so they allow us to identify where we consider the risks are and then actually manage them within an embedded system of systems.
Right, and Elanor, some companies I work with are holding off on AI because they're waiting for it to be safe for their staff to use. Now, I worry about that because like cars still aren't safe, but hell, we've done a lot in terms of improving their safety, and now our knowledge and systems is way better today than it was. But what, Elanor, would you say to those companies that are sort of looking at this and we're holding off investment, we're holding off really doing anything because we want to ensure it's safe?
Oh, and look, I do not want to create a sense that I'm a techno-utopian who thinks that we should just let it rip and see what happens. And again, this is going to come down to one's risk tolerance. If you want to be the person in the 1915s who took an internal combustion engine and lashed it to what was effectively a coach intended to follow behind a horse, be that person. If you want to wait until now and have a car that has all of the safety systems around radar-based auto cruise control and lane deviation and keeping track of your eyes and all of that sort of stuff, be that company. That's fine. The point is that very few people actually are refusing to use vehicles at all.
Yeah. And my next question, which will be the next webinar because we're out of time.
Yeah, we are
do we
getting out
need
of
it to
time.
be do we need it to be an Australian-made AI to feel more comfortable with it?
And that's a
maybe
whole
that
other
is
webinar.
the next
Yes,
webinar.
it is a whole other webinar. So it brings us almost to the end of our time together today. And I see the results from the poll where people have gained new insights and practical knowledge, thanks to our amazing expert panel. But if I can pose just one last question to the panel, what is one idea, and you'll have to make it quick, thought or challenge you'd like to leave the audience with today? We'll start with Kendra.
So I know that at least at the beginning of the webinar, a lot of folk were bold enough to say that they were quite new to the space and still felt they didn't understand it particularly well. So the one thing I'd love for those people to take away is this is a really useful tool, and it is not magic. And it is super easy if you deal with it in only a peripheral way, and particularly if you listen to a lot of what Sam Altman says, to believe that this is an oracle. And so I think the best thing you can do to take forward your own confidence in AI and be more and more cognizant about where it makes sense to use it in your personal life and in your business life is this is not thinking. It is not an intelligence similar to a human intelligence. It is an extremely useful tool, just like Google search is an extremely useful tool. And you need to bring your own common sense and troubleshooting to the answers that the tools give you. I think if you engage with it in that way, you'll feel more confident about using it, and you will start to notice what it's really useful for and what it isn't so useful for. And it might just get you off the edge of the pool in terms of jumping in and having a play.
Stefan.
I'd agree. I think we're at a really important point in humanity's history with this widespread adoption of artificial intelligence and the growth in capabilities happening at the same time. I think it is a significant shift, and absolutely, it's hard for me to find a career, a profession, a company where AI won't play some sort of role potentially. Having said that, turning it into value is complex and tricky. And whether you're a student starting to work out which AI tools to pick up, or whether you're the CEO of a big company, you're making investment decisions about scarce time, resources, what you're going to invest in. And you want to start to turn your attention to making those decisions carefully. And I hope the guide we've written provides some help along the way in doing that.
And Elanor, some final words?
And just to wrap that up, I'll go back to my observation around systems. Pretty much every company in existence, or at least your customers, is a brownfield redevelopment when it comes to incorporating AI into your business value proposition and your internal models. That means that you need to think very carefully about artificial intelligence interventions within the wider context. Don't think of these things as externalities that impact on your AI project. Think of these as, this is the system I want to change. How might my AI project change it? Or do I need to think of something else?
Thank you. Thanks to our amazing panel for sharing their insights on this important topic. And thanks to everyone online for your engagement and questions. I realise we didn't get to all of your questions, but we will be sending up a follow-up email with more information and a recording of the session sometime next week. We'll leave it there. Some food for thought. Thanks for your time, everyone, and have a fantastic week. Bye-bye.